If you're trying to decide between moving to Seattle and moving to the East Side, what I'm about to tell you is going to completely change the conversation. The new two-line light rail connection just recently opened across Lake Washington, and it links Seattle with the East Side in a way that did not exist before. So if you're trying to decide between Seattle and the East Side, this is going to make a huge impact. By the end of this video, you'll know where this new connection actually matters, where it barely changes anything, and which East Side areas specifically are going to be more realistic if you want easy access to Seattle. I actually tested it myself. I rode from the South Bellevue station to Chinatown, then up to U District and back again. It was $6 round trip, no parking, no bridge traffic, and honestly, it was way more convenient than I expected. But here's the part people are going to misunderstand. This does not mean the entire East Side suddenly became easy to live in without a car. And this won't be a deep dive into every East Side city. I'll do a separate video on that. This video is about one specific question. How much does this new connection actually change the Seattle versus East Side decision? Bellevue is the obvious winner here. If there's one East Side city that changes the most because of this, it's Bellevue. More specifically, the parts of Bellevue that are close to the actual rail corridor. That's going to be South Bellevue, East Main, Downtown Bellevue, Wilburton, Spring District, and Bell Red. They all become more interesting now because that connection is real. You can get on a train on the east side and get into Seattle without dealing with the I-90 traffic, downtown parking, or guessing how bad the bridge crossing is going to be, and that makes a really big difference in our area. Bellevue was already one of the strongest east side options because it has the job centers, the offices, restaurants, condos, shopping, and a more urban feel than most of the east side. But the two line adds something that Bellevue didn't have before, and that was a practical rail connection into Seattle. So that doesn't mean Bellevue suddenly becomes cheap. It's still expensive. It doesn't mean every Bellevue neighborhood is going to be walkable, and it doesn't mean that everyone that lives in Bellevue is going to ride the train every day. But if you want East Side convenience and still want real access to Seattle, the right parts of Bellevue just became a lot easier to justify. And keep in mind, Bellevue was already a strong suit for the East Side. The two line just makes it the right parts of Bellevue a lot stronger. Redmond is the other big winner, but for a different reason. Bellevue gets the attention because it feels like the East Side's downtown, but Redmond might be where this connection quietly changes the daily math for a lot of people. Redmond has always made sense if your life is tied to Microsoft, Overlake, the Tech Corridor, or Marymore Park. But before this connection, Redmond definitely felt a lot more separated from Seattle. It's right on the far east border of the East Side, so it can definitely feel a lot more suburban. But now, Redmond feels a lot more connected to the rest of the system. So that doesn't turn Redmond into Capitol Hill. It doesn't change anything about the fact that there's really no nightlife there. And it doesn't mean that if you live in Redmond, you're going to be able to ditch your car. But if you're near downtown Redmond, Marymore Village, the Technology Center, or Overlake, the two line makes Redmond a lot more practical for someone who still wants access to Bellevue and Seattle. And that's where the tension lies as well. Redmond might look further out on the map, but if your life lines up with the train, it's going to feel a lot closer than you expect once you're actually living here. So Bellevue's the obvious winner overall. Redmond's actually the practical winner. Now, Kirkland is where the conversation gets tricky. Kirkland might be one of the most desirable East Side cities from a lifestyle standpoint. That's definitely not arguable. You got waterfront, downtown Kirkland, Juanita, Totem Lake, the parks, the lake views, and it's more relaxed than Bellevue. But we're not talking about which city has the best lifestyle. We're talking about which areas are the most impacted by this new connection. And Kirkland is not a big light rail winner here. So a lot of people might hear that the East Side is more connected to Seattle now and assume that Kirkland falls into that basket the same way Bellevue or Redmond does, but it does not. Kirkland can definitely be a great place to live. It's definitely a lifestyle play. But if your decision is based heavily on light rail access, Kirkland's a lot more complicated. You still have to think about how you're going to get to the station, how much of a trip still involves driving, how often you're dealing with 405. And I can also mention that part of Kirkland and 405 is a major construction project that's going to be going on for a very long time. So there's a lot of complicating factors. And this doesn't make Kirkland worse. It just means that the two lines should not be the main reason that you pick Kirkland. If you pick Kirkland, it's because you really like Kirkland. So do not pick it because you think the new light rail's suddenly going to make it function like South Bellevue or downtown Bellevue, because that's a very different thing. Now, Sammamish is where the hype around the two line really starts to fall apart. And I don't mean that as an insult to Sammamish, it's just a different kind of East Side living. Sammamish is not directly changed by the light rail in the same way Bellevue or Redmond are. If you live in Sammamish, you're still going to be driving to most things. You're still planning around commute timing. You're still thinking about roads, distance, and how long it takes to get to where you actually need to go. But the train can still be useful occasionally. So you might drive to the station in Bellevue and use it for a Seattle trip. Maybe you want to avoid parking downtown or use it for a game. But that's not the same as living in a rail-connected neighborhood. And keep in mind, there's a big difference between I can access the train if I plan around it, and the train is part of my normal daily life. And this is the kind of thing I help people think through all the time when they're relocating here. Not just which city sounds good on paper, but what does the day-to-day actually look like once you factor in the commute, transit, parking, your budget, and what kind of lifestyle that you'd like to have. For Sammamish, the two line might be a nice regional benefit, but it doesn't fundamentally change the Sammamish lifestyle. So that's going to be important to keep in mind. So if someone is considering Sammamish, the decision should still be based on whether they want a quieter, more residential, car-based East Side life, not because they want to use the new light rail and have really, really easy access to Seattle. And that's where the map can be misleading. Issaquah is similar, but with a slightly different twist. Issaquah has a strong appeal because it gives you access to the trails, the mountains, Lake Sammamish, I-90, and a more outdoor lifestyle. But if we're talking specifically about the two line, Issaquah is not one of the areas that changes the most. If you live in Issaquah, the new connection might be useful. You may be able to drive to South Bellevue or another station, park and take the train into Seattle. That definitely could be better than driving all the way into the city, especially if you want to avoid parking or traffic. But again, it's not the same as living directly on the rail corridor. So Issaquah is still going to have a commute decision and consideration. So the main things to keep in mind here is direct corridor areas are going to change the most. Nearby but disconnected areas change a little bit, and the further car dependent areas are essentially unchanged and are going to have the same exact lifestyle. And this is what stood out to me after actually riding it. For $6, I went from South Bellevue into Chinatown, walked around, came all the way back without parking, didn't have to deal with bridge traffic, and without thinking about where to leave my car in Seattle. And that was a very real change from the options that you had to get into Seattle prior to this line opening up. And the ride back made it even more obvious. Coming out of the city, seeing downtown Seattle and Mount Rainier at sunset, it really felt like the East Side and Seattle were connected in a way that they just weren't before. But that feeling only matters if the train actually fits your lifestyle. So where you work, where you go out, how often you have to cross the lake, whether you live close enough to a station, and whether you'll actually use the train or whether you're just going to tell yourself that you will. So that's going to be the real test. So if you're deciding between Seattle and the East Side, here's how I would think about it with this in mind. Bellevue becomes a lot more compelling, especially near the rail corridor. Redmond is suddenly a lot more practical, especially if your life is already tied to the tech corridor. Kirkland is still a lifestyle choice. You're not going to move there because of the light rail. Sammamish, mostly unchanged, still going to be car dependent. Issaquah is going to be very similar, very commute dependent, and you might use the train occasionally as a convenience factor, but it's not going to be a day-to-day lifestyle. So if you're watching this and you're trying to narrow down where you would actually fit, this is usually where a local conversation helps. A map can definitely show you distances, but it does not show you how an area feels to live Monday through Friday. So the better question is not Seattle or East Side. The better question is, does this new connection change the area I'm actually considering, or am I just reacting to the headline? And if you're moving here, that difference definitely matters. So the bottom line, Seattle just changed, but not equally for everyone. The two line makes Seattle, Bellevue, and Redmond feel more connected than they used to. I definitely felt that firsthand when I wrote it, but the East Side is still not one lifestyle, and the new connection does not impact every area the same way. So if you're thinking about moving to Seattle or the East Side and you're trying to figure out which area actually fits your commute, budget, and day-to-day life, feel free to reach out. I help people sort through this before they start touring homes, because choosing the right area is a lot more important to do first before you start choosing the right house.